The Straits of Hormuz. I made a video a few days ago where I laid out the case that we're not really in a ceasefire. Everyone's talking about it being a ceasefire because there aren't missiles flying and there aren't airstrikes being carried out. But what I argued is that what we've actually seen is the Americans move from kinetic attacks, the Americans and Israelis, to siege warfare, one of the oldest forms of warfare. You read about it in the Bible, right? Laying siege to your enemy to bring about their collapse. It's a type of warfare. So the war hasn't actually stopped at all, just moved to a different type of warfare. That's what I argued in that video. And yesterday, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, Dan Caine, gave a briefing on how the blockade of Hormuz is working. And the way he explains it, you can tell that that's exactly what this is. This is a siege, and especially the last line of that part of his briefing in the clip that I'm going to show you. Fascinating. And it's also just super interesting. I was watching the whole briefing and I was like, wow, I got to show this to my audience, where he explains the mechanics of how exactly the blockade is working. And it's really interesting. Now, after I show you that video, we're going to talk about something that no one else is discussing, and that is the impact of what's going on in the Straits of Hormuz on the other Gulf states, on Kuwait, Bahrain, UAE, all those other states, and how they're dealing with it. It's a fascinating part of what's happening that I haven't seen anyone else touch on. So make sure you stay with me for that. Okay, let's move now to General Dan Caine, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, yesterday in his briefing. Here we go.
Mr. Chairman, over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary, and good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for being here today. Last week, the President of the United States directed a ceasefire that temporarily paused major combat operations in Iran. The unprecedented effort by America's joint force during Operation Epic Fury set the conditions for this ceasefire. And as the Secretary said, I'd like to emphasize during this pause that the United States Joint Force remains postured and ready to resume major combat operations at literally a moment's notice. This morning, I'd like to give you an update on the ongoing blockade in the CENTCOM AOR, Area of Responsibility. On Monday, 13 April, at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, at the direction of the President, America's joint force began implementing a blockade against Iran under the leadership of Admiral Cooper and the team at CENTCOM. Let me be clear, this blockade applies to all ships, regardless of nationality, heading into or from Iranian ports. The U.S. action is a blockade of Iran's ports and coastline, not a blockade of the Strait of Hormuz. Enforcement will occur inside Iran's territorial seas and in international waters. In addition to this blockade, the joint force, through operations and activities in other areas of responsibility, like the Pacific area of responsibility under the command of Admiral Paparo, will actively pursue any Iranian-flagged vessel or any vessel attempting to provide material support to Iran. This includes dark fleet vessels carrying Iranian oil. As most of you know, dark fleet vessels are those illicit or illegal ships evading international regulations, sanctions, or insurance requirements. More than 10,000 sailors, Marines, and airmen, over a dozen ships and dozens of aircraft are executing this mission. And let me walk you through this operation a little bit. Please go to the first slide. First to the graphic. This is taken before the blockade began. North is up. You can see the blockade line here in the center of the graphic, denoted by the red dashed line. This map is a pull from our common operating picture that we use to allow commanders and key leaders to see what is happening in near real time. We just grabbed screen grabs to highlight the actions and activities. What is not shown is how incredibly congested this area is and the incredible work that our sailors are doing to ensure that they can work in and around an incredibly busy water space. What is also not depicted here is the massive force of fighters, intelligence aircraft, helicopters, and other embarked forces, to include aerial refueling tankers, that are up overhead this blockade area. You'll note that U.S. forces are in blue. Iranian ships are in red. And as we started this blockade, there were 7 ships of interest that were of concern for U.S. Central Command. Through a variety of intelligence tools and with the assistance of the Office of Naval Intelligence and other intelligence agencies, the force began to hunt for potential interdictors at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Next slide, please. It's now 12:40 Eastern Daylight Time, 2 hours and 40 minutes into the blockade, as attempted blockade runners attempt to hop the line. U.S. forces began to commit. Out in front of them was a range of intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, and tactical assets. And immediately these runners began to see, sense, and feel America's combat power compressing upon them. The lead ship, normally a destroyer as depicted here, along with air power off of the USS Abraham Lincoln Strike Group, began to move towards those ships. At each point, the United States Navy will transmit a warning. A young sailor, normally on the bridge of one of those destroyers, a junior officer, picks up that mic and transmits, and I quote, "Do not attempt to breach the blockade. Vessels will be boarded for interdiction and seizure transiting to or from Iranian ports. Turn around or prepare to be boarded. If you do not comply with this blockade, we will use force." And as this message is being transmitted, as I mentioned earlier, those shipmasters can literally see, sense, and feel the pressure around them. It's a finely tuned machine, rehearsed multiple times, and executed now 13 times since the blockade has begun. Next slide, please. We're now 24 hours plus into the blockade. You can see the turning around of multiple ships, 12 of which stayed inside the blockade line, one of which not depicted off to the eastern side, turned around before even attempting it. Any ship that would cross the blockade would result in our sailors executing pre-planned tactics designed to bring the force to that ship, if need be, board the ship and take her over. And that includes a series of escalated force options, which could include warning shots and others. Next slide. The final graphic shows taken at 11:20 p.m. the night of 14 April. You can see that the captains of all these ships have made the wise decision not to move, transit, or run this blockade. As I mentioned, so far 13 ships have made the wise choice of turning around. And as we continue to hold this blockade at the order of the Secretary and the President, any vessel that compares to comply with our instructions will be dealt with accordingly. As of this morning, U.S. Central Command has not been required to board any particular ships. And I'll remind you that we are also conducting similar maritime interdiction actions and activities in the Pacific AOR against those ships that left that area before we began the blockade.
Wow. That last line is what we call in the media space a buried lead. Meaning it's the whole time he's talking about Hormuz and he's talking about how the blockade works and how they're making the Iranian ships or turn back, and then he ends it off by saying that they're not only doing this, they're also doing interdictions on ships in the Pacific that originated from Iran before the blockade went into effect. Okay, so this is not about opening up the Straits of Hormuz. That's the way it was sold originally. Oh, the Americans want the Straits of Hormuz opened. Yes, that's true. They want the Straits of Hormuz opened. And putting this blockade and only allowing certain ships through ostensibly kind of opens it And relating to what we're about to talk about, it also means that ships could get through to Qatar and Kuwait and Bahrain and the other Gulf states that are in there. But let's remember, for a number of weeks, it was closed. There was shelling going on there. There was missiles flying. The Iranians still have all kinds of rockets and abilities to disrupt shipping. And there's the threat of mines. And a lot of shipping companies are, even with the American assurances, are not so confident about going through the Straits of Hormuz. But that last point that he said is so critical. This is not about the Straits of Hormuz. I mean, the Straits of Hormuz is a key factor here, but that's not what this is about. This is about a siege, a blockade of the entire Iranian economy. Okay, again, they're even going into the Pacific to cut off Iranian ships that are there. Now, on to the other part of the story that I wanted to share with you. So there was this headline from yesterday. Abu Dhabi, and this is a kind of story that doesn't really make the news. Abu Dhabi Ports Group strengthens supply chains in the Arabian Gulf region. This is the UAE. Abu Dhabi is the UAE. Abu Dhabi Ports Group has successfully launched new regional container and air routes, as well as a land bridge to maintain the smooth operation of supply chains amidst regional disruptions by directing routes through the Fujairah and Khorfakan and utilizing its own fleet of 24 vessels and a fleet of 800 trucks. The company has provided clients with enhanced flexibility and reduced costs. And I'm not going to read you the whole article. And let me just explain what this is all about. Okay, the UAE. Here, let's do this right. So here you got a map. Okay. So you have the tankers that are stuck in the Gulf that can't get out, right? But that narrow passage, the Strait of Hormuz you see on the map between Iran and the Arabian Peninsula, is not only a highway going out, meaning what we've been talking about when we talk about the Straits of Hormuz is oil coming out, and can Kuwait and Bahrain and Qatar, can they ship their oil out, and the oil prices going up, and a crisis of energy, that gas prices, that's what everyone's focused on. But let's remember, the Straits of Hormuz are also the way in to these countries. Okay, and this is the piece of the story that nobody is talking about. So it's the main route for goods coming into the Gulf states: food, medicine, electronics, almost everything that people living around this Gulf depend on for daily life. And right now, it's effectively closed in both directions. It's not officially closed. Americans say they're letting other ships through, but shipping companies don't want to send ships through into this volatile region. And for the last few weeks, it's been very dangerous. So while the world is, again, concerned with oil prices and worrying about that, tens of millions of people in these Gulf states are living in some of the wealthiest cities on earth, and they're dealing with a very real crisis of basic supplies. Now look at the UAE on the map, okay? Let me show you where the UAE is. The UAE is here, okay? Let's zoom in a little bit on the UAE. So here's the UAE. The UAE is this area here. This tip here is not UAE. It's part of Oman. Oman is here. Let me explain. Oman is here, and then there's a border, and Oman is split in two. This tip here, you see where the black line is? This black line, this tip belongs to Oman, and it's separated from the rest of Oman. Okay, and in between is UAE. So the UAE is like here. So this port was the port mentioned in that news item. This is the port of Fujairah, and the port of, and there's another one right next to it, the port of Khorfakan. Okay, these two ports, Fujairah here and Khorfakan, are two ports that the UAE has on the outside of the strait. Okay, because the UAE has a coastline on the outside part of the Strait of Hormuz. This is critical to understand what's happening here. Okay, so that's, again, Fujairah and Khorfakan. And they've suddenly become the most important piece of logistics infrastructure in the entire region. So what the Abu Dhabi Ports Group has done is this: ships that would normally sail through Hormuz into Dubai and Abu Dhabi, okay, and Dubai and Abu Dhabi are over here, right? So usually they would have these are the big population centers. So usually the way goods come in, we're not talking about oil going out, we're talking about goods coming in. The way goods would come into the UAE is they come into the Strait of Hormuz and they port at Dubai or Abu Dhabi. But now they're avoiding that and they're porting them at Fujairah and Khor Fakkan. Okay, this is what they were announcing in that news item that I just shared with you. So the cargo is then loaded onto hundreds of trucks and rail cars and driven across the UAE and delivered to the Gulf side population centers. They've also run over 100 emergency cargo flights for the most time-critical goods. In just 6 weeks, for most of the war, they've moved hundreds of thousands of shipping containers through this improvised system. It's one of the largest emergency logistics operations ever mounted in the region. But here's the thing. The UAE isn't just doing this for itself. Look at the map again. Okay, Kuwait, Qatar, and Bahrain are entirely inside the Gulf, but they're not like the UAE. They don't have anything outside. Here's Qatar, here's Bahrain, and here's Kuwait. So they don't have the luxury of having a port on the outside edge of the Gulf. Okay, so they're completely dependent on Hormuz or a workaround of some sort. Now, Qatar is arguably the most exposed because it's one of the world's largest exporters of LNG, of liquefied natural gas, but it has no way to get it out. It's already declared what's called force majeure on contracts with South Korea, China, Italy, and Belgium. Force majeure, basically, it's a term that means that you're breaking a contract, but not because you're breaking the contract, but because you physically cannot deliver what you promised through no fault of your own. In other words, they're kind of defaulting. On the import side of things, that's what we're really talking about in this video. Around 70% of the entire Gulf region's food supply normally comes in through the Hormuz Strait. And by mid-March, that flow had been reduced by about 70%. So 70% of 70%. Retailers began airlifting groceries in to Qatar. Qatar gets 99%. This is another dimension. It gets 99% of its drinking water from desalination plants that depend on imported chemicals and other components to keep them running, and they need a steady supply of those. So Qatar, Kuwait, and Bahrain are now they're routing their imports through the UAE ports of Fujairah and Khor Fakkan, and they're trucking the goods across the Emirates to reach their own populations. Now, this brings us to a part of the story that most people do not realize, because we always think of the Gulf states as this one family of states. But just a few years ago, between 2017 and 2021, the UAE was one of a group of countries that imposed a total blockade on Qatar. It was air, land, and sea. Qatar's defense minister at the time called it a bloodless declaration of war. There was almost a shooting war between this coalition of states and Qatar. The Saudis were also involved in it. The UAE and Qatar only reopened their embassies in 2023. So there was like a 6-year period or more that they didn't even have diplomatic relations. The relationship between Qatar and the UAE, even now, is described by a lot of analysts as kind of this cautious, pragmatic cooperation, but they don't really get along with each other. But here we are now. The country that blockaded Qatar and almost went to war with Qatar a few years ago is now the logistics lifeline for Qatar. Interesting dynamic. Now, that's the thing about geography, right? It doesn't care about your politics. In other words, if there's a crisis, you got to deal with whatever relationships you have, and you work with whoever you have. The Hormuz crisis has forced a kind of involuntary cooperation on these nations that are actually adversaries in many ways in the political sphere. Okay, let me sum this up. The oil story is real, and that's what everyone's talking about. But this story, the scramble to keep the lights on and to keep the shelves stocked and to keep groceries in the stores, the improvised routes and the emergency flights and the old rivalries that are being set aside is another side of the Hormuz crisis. And that's what I wanted to share with you. And everyone else is talking about oil, this is a big piece of the story. And there's one other aspect of this that I want to add in. Before I do that, I just want to remind you to click the link in the description of this video to sign up for 2 newsletters that will really keep you abreast of everything, that all the messaging that we're putting out, and news and information from Israel that is very important so that you understand what is really going on. You cannot rely on mainstream media or even your social media feed to give you organically accurate information or news from Israel and analysis from Israel that is not slanted against Israel and that reflects your worldview, a biblical worldview. If that's my worldview. So sign up for Israel 365 News. It's a daily newsletter, real analysis, no spin, and you'll find a lot of my writings there. And you can just put in your first name, last name, email, phone number, and subscribe for free. And or also sign up for the Israel 365 Action weekly newsletter. This is just once a week, and this will give you more. It'll give you access to information about upcoming webinars and campaigns that are being run, and action items so that you can defend Israel and Western civilization. There's a lot of issues that we focus on. One of them is the persecution of Christians. One of them is sovereignty or Jewish sovereignty over Judea and Samaria. We have a number of issues we focus in on. The importance of the Jewish-Christian alliance is at the heart of what Israel 365 Action stands for. So go sign up for that right away. The last aspect of this that I wanted to share is that everything that I've just told you explains another one of these weirdo little stories in Iranian state media. If you watch this channel, you know that I focus a lot on paying attention to what is being said in the state media of all these countries, especially totalitarian countries, countries that are not democracies. The state media is a very good window into where they are going with the conflict. And in WANA, Iranian state media, there was this weird little news story yesterday: drone strikes and Hormuz closure sidelining Fujairah. Now, Fujairah was never such a major port anyway. That's the port that we've been talking about over here on the outside. As you saw, it was much more of a minor port because the main population centers of the UAE are on this side. So here's this news story that drone strikes and Hormuz closure sidelining Fujairah. This is the Iranians. The UAE's port of Fujairah, once a strategic refueling hub for tankers, has seen its fuel sales plummet by 70% and lost its regional standing due to the twin blows of drone attacks and the closure of the Strait of Hormuz. The U.S.-Israeli war against Iran has dealt a heavy and perhaps irreparable blow to one of the UAE's most profitable industries. The port of Fujairah, known as a strategic hub and an alternative for ship refueling due to its location outside the Strait of Hormuz, is now facing an unprecedented decline in sales and has effectively lost its position in the region. This is all, of course, the opposite of the truth. Fujairah is becoming only more important. We'll talk about that in a moment. Reports indicate that marine fuel at the port of Fujairah plunged, blah, blah, blah. Okay. And then it talks about the drone attacks, that on March 14th, there was a drone attack by the Iranians to Fujairah, which also tells you something, that meaning the Iranians wanted to cut off the alternative route that the UAE could use. So they were actually bombing Fujairah because it's not enough to block the Straits of Hormuz. They want to block off all ability to receive shipping. So they targeted that. And it talks about oil transit reduced. And look what it says at the end. Analysts believe that Fujairah is no longer the safe and strategic hub it once was, as the high risk of insecurity has driven away investors and shipping companies. Evidence shows that refueling demand has shifted to other global ports, particularly Singapore. This redirection deals a long-term blow to the UAE's commercial position on the world energy map. This is what the story is all about. They always leave it for the end. Analysts believe that Fujairah is no longer safe. High risk of insecurity. What are they trying to do? They see the UAE building this effective workaround, building up Fujairah and making this announcement about this new logistics, expanded logistics based on Fujairah and Corfacan. So what they're trying to do is message to the world, no, Fujairah is not safe, Fujairah is not safe. They want to scare shipping companies and scare other states and scare businesses away from Fujairah, because Fujairah is one of the key ways that the Gulf states are working around their disruption of the Straits of Hormuz. There you have it, folks. A part of this whole story that nobody else is really talking about. Again, as things go forward, and the Americans get more and more control, and there's more and more security in the Strait of Hormuz, this will become less of an important workaround. But there's diplomatic implications, because when the dust settles on this whole thing, this dependence that the Qataris and the Kuwaitis and the Bahrainis have had now on the UAE could have some implications down the road in terms of those relationships. Very interesting stuff. All right. God bless. Keep watching. Leave a comment. Let me know, helpful criticisms. One criticism I've been getting is that I repeat myself too much. I apologize. I am working on that. Please keep the constructive criticism coming. And I want to thank all of you for helping this channel grow so quickly. We really have a growing and well-informed audience. I love the comments. A lot of very interesting comments. I'm even thinking of maybe making a video every now and then, just with some of the best comments from viewers. Let me know what you think of that idea, if you would even watch such a thing. But again, thanks for watching. Make sure you're subscribed, and please tell others about what we're doing here. God bless.